Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? It's your boy, The Doc, and we are back with another fantasy headliner video. It's that time of the year again. Players are reporting back to training camp or not reporting. I'm looking at you, Terry McLaurin. Get your act together. But that means that we need to go through all of the players that were placed on the PUP and NFI lists. And in today's video, I'm going to explain the difference between those two lists and discuss all of the biggest names that we need to know about for our fantasy drafts, which are right around the corner. Let's get into it. First up, let's talk about the players that were placed on injury list prior to the start of training camp, players that are designated for the IR or the reserve PUP or reserve NFI before training camp have already been ruled out for the entire season. They do count against the salary cap, but they don't count against the 53-man roster. This year, we do have a few fantasy relevant names that were already ruled out for the season. First up, we got Panthers running back Jonathan Brooks, who tore his ACL for the second time in about 13 months last November. And we've known about this one for a while. We knew he was not going to be able to play this year. But a surprise right before training camp was Titans quarterback, or I guess backup quarterback now, Will Levis, who opted for surgery on his throwing shoulder, which he had an injury to last year and never fully recovered from this offseason. Opting to have surgery will miss the entire season. A little interesting about the timing of this one. I wonder if he intentionally waited so that he would be ruled out for the entire season. Feels like something he probably could have gotten addressed at the end of last season, but again, he is done for the year as well after opting for shoulder surgery. I'm going to throw up a few names on the screen here from guys that have already been ruled out for the rest of the year. For anybody who is an IDP fan or anybody that's in Dynasty, these are lesser names, not somebody I'm going to spend a lot of time on, but I feel like I should mention them in this video just as guys that we've already know are ruled out for the year. Next up, let's talk about the difference between the PUP list and the NFI list, because these are lists that I think people get confused about. While functionally these lists are exactly the same, there is a meaning behind the different designations, PUP versus NFI. Players on the PUP list or the physically unable to perform list were injured due to NFL-related activities. The injury either occurred during a game or a team event or team-sanctioned practice. These are not events that happened outside of NFL play. Players on the NFI list or non-football injury list were hurt outside of those team events or off the clock, as some people would say. Either the injury happened in college or during a private workout in the offseason, or in Najee Harris's case, while lighting off fireworks with his buddies. While these injuries could be caused by football or football training, if they weren't happening at team-sanctioned events, they don't count towards the PUP. They get put on the NFI list instead. And you may have noticed that I mentioned the reserve PUP list and reserve NFI list. Let's talk about the difference between active and reserve. So when we're looking at the list specifically, all of the players that I'll talk about for the rest of the video are being placed on the active PUP list or active NFI list, not the reserve list. Every single time we talk about the PUP or NFI going forward, at this point in the season, we're talking about players on the active list, not the reserve list. The difference is that players on the active list can come off of that list at any point during training camp as soon as they're ready to fully participate in practice. Players on the reserve list are the ones that we are talking about missing the first 4 games of the NFL season. And the important distinction here is that players must be placed on the active list at the start of training camp to be eligible to be placed on the reserve list at the end of training camp. That is something that a lot of people get confused about. They think that you can just place any player that gets hurt during training camp on the PUP. That's not true. Those players are going to go on the IR, not these lists specifically. These are for injuries that happened prior to training camp that the players came into training camp with. That's important because players on the active list count towards the 90-man training camp roster throughout their cuts. However, players placed on the reserve list don't count towards the 53-man roster at the end of training camps. Players on both of these lists are also allowed to practice in team drills, which you would not typically see with a player that is on IR. And after they are on the reserve list, they do have a window where they can return to practice without being activated to that 53-man roster, which is why teams use these lists in general. It gives them the ability to practice players without having them count towards that 53-man roster. So now that we've talked about the business side of these two lists and we've got that all under control, let's talk about the actual players that are on this year's list. Let's start with the Texans first. We got Tank Dell. Now, Tank Dell had probably one of the worst injuries that we saw last season with his knee dislocation. I'd be very surprised if he was not placed on the reserve PUP list, missing at least the first 4 games and probably quite a few more after that. Don't be drafting Tank Dell. It just doesn't really seem like he's going to play a lot this year. But the surprising name on the Texans list was Joe Mixon. He has an ankle injury. And remember, he had an ankle injury that plagued him last year, which he then re-aggravated during spring training. He missed most of the workouts in June leading up to training camp, but the team is confident, even though he's still in a walking boot, that he will be ready for week 1. Nick Chubb is actually the one taking most of the early reps in camp per reports, which I'm sure will give Jake a full Chubb when he finds out about it. I mentioned him earlier, but Najee Harris does have an eye injury due to a fireworks accident during the 4th of July, probably already the most mysterious injury that we will see during the NFL season. And Harris is on the NFI list for this eye injury, but the team has stated this is a superficial eye injury, but it's not really something that you can rehab, kind of a wait and see situation. And the problem with that is that Omarion Hampton is not going to wait and see if Najee Harris is able to come back and be productive this year. He's going to get most of the reps in training camp, and he is probably going to run away with the RB1 job for the Chargers. He's already impressing in camp, and I would not be surprised if he does not let Najee Harris get a lot of run while he misses camp. So Omarion Hampton moving up draft boards this offseason as if he wasn't high enough already, due to this Najee Harris eye injury due to a fireworks accident. You'd think the NFL players would stop playing with fireworks, but we're going to move on to the 49ers. We've got Brandon Ayuk with his ACL/MCL injury from last year, and I'm already on the record of saying I am not drafting Brandon Ayuk this season. If you need convincing, just go check out my ACL video from last month. That said, none of the news has been positive for him thus far. I mean, they won't even commit to a timeline for Brandon Ayuk recovering from this. I'd be shocked if he was not on the reserve list to start this season, especially after not getting a timeline to start training camp. No thanks, I'm totally out. As for his teammate Ricky Pearsall, he had a hamstring strain in the earlier spring practices, and he tweaked that hamstring again recently, but it does seem like he is back running at full speed. I would not be surprised if he is cleared off of the PUP list either this weekend or sometime next week. The team's already said they expect him to be back in full very, very soon. I'm still drafting him with confidence as the team's wide receiver 1, but Juwan Jennings is going to be a value again this season, and George Kittle is probably going to be a top 3 or 4 tight end as long as he is healthy. Last guy we need to talk about is Chris Godwin. He's coming off that ankle dislocation from last year. He's not participating in team drills, but the team reports that they're still hopeful that he will be ready by week 1. I'm not really expecting that, but I'm going to dive into this injury a little bit deeper next week. So make sure that you have your subscription ready for the Fantasy Headliners and that you have turned on your notifications. You don't want to miss all of our preseason goodness. And another minor injury for the Bucs that I think it's just worth mentioning. Their offensive tackle, Tristan Wirfs, has a knee injury that will expect him to miss multiple games to start the year. They think 2 to 3, but it could be even longer. They could end up placing him on the reserve list because of this injury. So just know the team might start out a little slow to start the year without their star tackle. But one thing you might notice that I didn't mention in this video was Stefon Diggs. So he actually was not placed on the active PUP list for the Pats, which means he's not eligible for the reserve PUP list, which means they are very confident that he will be able to play. I actually reported on this last month in the ACL video that I thought of all the guys coming back from ACL tears, he was the one I thought was the most ready for week 1. And that was a month ago. So it looks like we're still trending in the right direction for Stefon Diggs. I think he could be a value this year in drafts, as players and fantasy players are not expecting him to be back at 100%, but he is trending in the right direction, which is good news if you want to draft Stefon Diggs. All right, guys, that's all I got for you this week. Hopefully it will help you with your PUP and NFI designations. I know this isn't really an exciting video, but it's worth knowing who could end up on those reserve lists. If you haven't already, make sure you check out the TFH draft guide. It is the best draft guide that you can buy on the market, and it's the only place that you can find my personal draft and don't draft list for all of the major players that I got injured last season. It hits at about an 80% hit rate. So I don't miss a whole lot when it comes to drafting or not drafting injured players. And again, the only place you can find that is the Fantasy Headliners draft guide. And there's all sorts of great info in that draft guide from Jake, Kyle, Mac, the whole team here at the Fantasy Headliners. We put a ton of work into that thing. It's pretty cheap. You absolutely should go to tfhdraftguide.com and get your copy today. That's all I got for you, and we will see you next time.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game.